Heliopolis was not lost. It was paved over. It was quarried for 1,000 years by sultans and pashas who needed limestone for mosques and fortifications, and what they could not carry away they buried under their own city. By the time Cairo's suburbs reached the old Sun Temple grounds in the 20th century, almost nothing remained above the soil except a single standing obelisk in a traffic roundabout in the district of Al-Matariyyah, a needle of red Aswan granite, 68 feet tall. It was raised by Senusret I around 1950 BC, and it is the oldest standing obelisk in Egypt and the last visible marker of a sacred precinct that once rivaled Karnak in size and ambition. And then, in March 2017, a German-Egyptian team working in a muddy lot between two apartment buildings, in water that had to be pumped out continuously because the groundwater table now sits above the level of the ancient floors, pulled a face out of the slurry. It was enormous. It was upside down. It had been broken in antiquity, and it had been lying in the mud for somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 years. When they rolled it over, the team realized they were looking at a colossal statue of a pharaoh, carved in quartzite, weighing several tons, and almost certainly representing Psamtik I, the king who in the 7th century BC reunified Egypt and pushed back the Assyrians. The site is called Souk al-Khamis. It is not a glamorous address. It is a working-class neighborhood in the northeast of Cairo. A place of mechanic shops and bakeries and laundry lines, and the excavation itself took place in a pit perhaps 30 feet across, hemmed in on all sides by concrete walls and rebar. The archaeologists worked with a front loader for the heavy lifting and trowels for the careful work, and the water never stopped seeping in. Photographs from the dig show men in waders standing thigh-deep in brown water, leaning against a face the size of a small car, trying to get a strap around its forehead. One image, widely circulated at the time, shows a workman crouched on the statue's cheekbone like a sailor on the back of a whale, brushing silt out of the corner of a stone eye. The statue, when reassembled, stood roughly 26 feet tall in life. Only fragments survived. The head, a section of the chest, the back pillar with hieroglyphic inscription, part of the crown, a fist. The fist alone is the size of a refrigerator. The eyes are almond-shaped, the lips full, the brow heavy in the way Twenty-Sixth Dynasty sculpture tends to be, a deliberate echo of older Old Kingdom royal portraiture, because Psamtik's court was obsessed with archaism, with proving its legitimacy by looking like the pharaohs of 2,000 years before. The quartzite itself came from the Gebel Ahmar quarries on the eastern edge of Cairo, the same red-brown stone the colossi of Memnon were cut from, hauled across the Nile floodplain on wooden sledges, and rolled into position on log rollers greased with Nile mud. The back pillar settled the identification. It carried one of the 5 royal names of Psamtik I, and it placed the statue squarely in the temple of Ra at Heliopolis, the precinct the Egyptians themselves called Iunu, the city of pillars. The Greeks renamed it Heliopolis, city of the sun, and the Bible calls it On, the place where, according to Genesis, Joseph married Asenath, daughter of the priest Potipharah. It is one of the oldest continuously occupied cult centers in the ancient world. Priests there were still performing sun rituals when Plato visited Egypt around 390 BC, and he reportedly studied with them for 13 years. Herodotus, who came a generation earlier, called the priests of Heliopolis the most learned of the Egyptians, and noted that they kept written records of the heavens going back tens of thousands of years. The temple complex at Iunu was, at its peak, larger than Karnak. Estimates put the precinct at around 1,000 acres. It contained obelisks by the dozen, sphinxes, sacred lakes, the famous Benben stone, the pyramidal capstone that was said to mark the spot where the sun first rose at the beginning of creation, and a school of theology that produced the cosmology underlying nearly all of Egyptian religion. The Ennead, the 9 gods born from Atum, came out of Heliopolis. The myth of Osiris was systematized there. When New Kingdom pharaohs wanted to legitimize themselves, they sent statues to Iunu. The Isht tree, the sacred Persea on whose leaves Thoth and Seshat were said to inscribe the name of each new king at his coronation, grew in its inner court, and almost none of it is visible today. What survives, beyond the lone obelisk of Senusret, is scattered across the world. Cleopatra's Needle on the Thames Embankment in London came from Heliopolis. So did the obelisk in Central Park in New York. So did the one in the Piazza del Popolo in Rome, moved there by Augustus in 10 BC after he conquered Egypt, because he wanted Heliopolitan obelisks specifically, as they were the oldest and most prestigious. The Romans dismantled the temple methodically. The Arab conquerors of the 7th century AD finished the job, using the limestone facing for the construction of Fustat and later Cairo itself. Mosques in the Old City contain Heliopolitan blocks in their foundations. The Mosque of Amr ibn al-As, the oldest in Africa, sits on a base partly recycled from Iunu, and travelers in the medieval period reported seeing hieroglyphs on stones reused upside down in Cairo's walls. So when the Psamtik statue came out of the mud in 2017, it was not a discovery in the sense of finding something nobody knew existed. Everyone knew Heliopolis was down there. What changed was the scale of what was still recoverable. The team, led by Dietrich Rau of the University of Leipzig and Ayman Ashmawi of Egypt's Ministry of Antiquities, had been working the site since 2012. They had already pulled up fragments of a temple of Nectanebo I, pieces of a Ramesses II colossus, and chunks of an obelisk of Thutmose III. The Psamtik find was the largest single piece by an order of magnitude. Initial press reports identified the statue as Ramesses II, partly because of the scale and partly because Ramesses had a documented presence at the site. The correction came within weeks, once the back pillar was cleaned and the cartouche read. The misidentification matters because it changes the historical weight of the find. A Ramesses colossus would be impressive, but expected. He built everywhere. A Psamtik colossus of this scale is something else. Very few large royal statues of the 26th dynasty have survived intact because the Persians, when they conquered Egypt in 525 BC under Cambyses, made a point of destroying Saite royal monuments. Psamtik's dynasty was, in a sense, the last gasp of independent pharaonic Egypt before the long sequence of foreign rulers, Persians, Greeks, Romans, Arabs, Ottomans, British, that would follow. The Colossus was raised from the pit in pieces over the course of several weeks in March and April of 2017. The head came first, lifted by crane through a gap between the apartment buildings, watched by crowds of local residents who had come out to see what their neighborhood had been sitting on. Children climbed onto parked cars for a better view. The torso fragment followed. Then the smaller pieces cataloged, wrapped in foam, and trucked to the Grand Egyptian Museum at Giza, where conservators began the slow work of reassembly. The statue is now part of the museum's permanent display, standing in the atrium where visitors enter. Dig deeper into what was found around the Colossus and the picture gets stranger. In the same trenches, the team recovered a small quartzite head of Psamtik II, the grandson, his features softer and the carving finer. They found a granite obelisk fragment inscribed for Ramesses II that had been deliberately recut in the late period, the older king's name still partly visible beneath the recarving. They found mud brick walls that had once been the precinct's outer enclosure, more than 50 feet thick at the base, the kind of wall built to keep a sacred area sacred. They found pottery from every period between the Old Kingdom and the Roman occupation, layered like sediment, sometimes literally so, because the floods of the Nile had inundated parts of the precinct repeatedly over 4,000 years. They also found smaller, more intimate things, a bronze situla, the ritual milk bucket used in temple processions, still bearing a chaste frieze of striding gods around its rim. A faience amulet of the goddess Bastet, no larger than a thumbnail, the glaze gone milky from the groundwater, but the cat's ears still sharp. A limestone offering table with the runnel cut for libations, the channel polished smooth by centuries of poured water and oil. A scribe's palette of dark wood with two cake-sized depressions for red and black ink, found within arm's reach of the colossus's broken jaw. And they found bones. Not human, but animal. Heliopolis was the center of the Mnevis bull cult, a sacred bull regarded as the living manifestation of Ra-Atum, and the Mnevis bulls were buried in a dedicated necropolis on the northern edge of the precinct. Auguste Mariette located the Mnevis tombs in the 19th century. The 2017 excavations turned up offering vessels and animal remains, consistent with the cult's continuing operation into the Sate period. Each bull, when it died, was mummified, fitted with gilded horns, and interred in a stone sarcophagus with full priestly rites. Ramesses VII built one of the surviving Mnevis chambers. Inside, the floor is still stained dark with the resins used in the mummification. The water is the constant antagonist. Cairo's water table has risen significantly over the last century, partly because of leaking pipes, partly because of the controlled flow of the Nile after the Aswan High Dam was completed in 1970. Before the dam, the annual flood would recede and the soil would dry out. After the dam, the water table sits high all year, and the archaeology of Heliopolis is now, effectively, underwater archaeology conducted on land. Every trench has to be pumped. Sandstone and limestone, which make up most of the surviving architectural fragments, are dissolving slowly in the groundwater. Quartzite, like the Psamtik Colossus, survives better, which is part of why it survived at all. The pumps run on diesel generators, and the noise of them, a low, constant industrial drone, is the soundtrack of every dig season in Al-Matariyyah. The 2017 find triggered a renewed urgency. The Ministry of Antiquities expanded the protected zone around the obelisk park, designated additional plots as off-limits to new construction, and authorized a long-term salvage program. But the math is brutal. The ancient precinct lies under several square kilometers of dense modern city. Excavation can only happen in empty lots, demolition sites, and the occasional infrastructure project. When the Cairo Metro extended its line through the area in the 2010s, archaeologists were given a narrow window to investigate before the tunneling proceeded. They pulled out fragments of statuary, sections of temple pavement, and the broken base of an obelisk. And then the trains began running over the site. Commuters on the Metro's third line now pass at speed and in fluorescent light through the buried outskirts of a city that worshipped the sun for 46 centuries. There is a particular kind of vertigo that comes from standing in Al-Matariyyah today. Above you, satellite dishes and laundry. Below your feet by perhaps 15 feet are the floors that priests walked on when the pyramids at Giza were already 2,000 years old. The obelisk of Senusret rises out of a small fenced park, surrounded by a low railing, with cats sleeping on the benches and children playing nearby. Tourists rarely come. The site is hard to reach, the neighborhood is residential, and there is no museum on the spot. The finds are taken to Giza, or to the Egyptian Museum in Tahrir Square. What remains in place is the obelisk and the knowledge of what surrounds it underground. A few hundred yards away in a walled garden the locals call Al-Matariyyah's sycamore, an old tree is venerated as the spot where the Holy Family is said to have rested during the flight into Egypt, a Christian memory grafted onto the same sacred ground that had already held 4,000 years of sun worship. The Colossus of Psamtik now stands cleaned, restored, and lit. The crack lines where the fragments rejoin are visible if you look closely. The eyes, which spent so many centuries facing down into Nile mud, now look out across the polished floor of the Grand Egyptian Museum at a flow of visitors, most of whom have never heard of Iunu and who came to see Tutankhamun. The label is short. The story it can tell in a museum caption is not the story of the city the statue stood in. Most of Heliopolis is still down there, the Temple of Ra-Atum, the dozens of obelisks that once marked it, the workshops, the priests' houses, the necropolis of the men who tended the cult of the sun for nearly 46 centuries. None of it has been excavated. It cannot be excavated because there are apartment blocks on top of it. and roads, and a metro line that has only clipped its outermost edge. The pharaoh in the museum garden is one fragment. The city he stood in is still buried, beneath bakeries and bus stops and the morning call to prayer, waiting for the next shaft, the next station, the next time Cairo decides to dig. Something ancient still lies beneath the surface, undisturbed, waiting. If you want to see more stories like this one, subscribe to The Drowned Map. There is a lot more buried down there.